Hello, hi everyone. My name is Jamal Brathwaite, and I'd like to welcome you to the Brockton Resident Forum. Today is Sunday, November 21st, 2021. We're here in the city of Brockton. The purpose of the Brockton Resident Forum is to review the city council meeting agendas to identify what was achieved in the last meeting, city council meeting, and to identify what is on the agenda for this upcoming week, and to identify issues that are important for residents to advocate for, and to identify what's not on the agenda that should be on the agenda. So with me today, I am accompanied by residents here in the city of Brockton, and I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. Mark Osborne, could you begin?
Sure. My name is Mark Osborne. I live at 14 Harwich Road on the west side of Brockton. Been here since 1998. And I think this is a great forum that you put together, Jamal, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Mark. Michelle?
And my name is Michelle Henson. I'm a longtime Brockton resident. My family's owned the house here for almost 50 years. And I appreciate this forum. I have learned so much. And become more engaged. So I love it. It's great.
And Trinette Hall?
Hello, my name is Trinette Hall. I've been a resident in Brockton for about 6 years. I've also been a social worker in the community of Brockton for well over 15 years. And thank you, Jamal. I think, like Michelle, this is an opportunity to exercise civic engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Lasso.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lasso, and I've lived in Brockton since 2003. I appreciate having this kind of forum to bring the issues that need attention to the city, to the people of the city. And I feel like it's a great way for people to participate and be civically engaged.
Wonderful.
So it's been a great forum.
Thank you, Liz. And Patrick Quinn.
Hello, my name is Patrick Quinn. I'm a fifth generation Brocktonian here, living on Addison Street in Ward 7. Educated in the public school system, and was once a Brockton Water Commissioner. And this is a great place to talk about things about Brockton.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Jean Holmes.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jean Holmes. I've been living here in the city since 1982, but my family was born and raised here back through at least 3 generations. And I've been civically involved in the city as well as being an assistant district attorney for 25.5 years and representing citizens here in Brockton.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. On that note, we've done the intro. We are going to move forward with the agenda. So agenda number 1 is that we're going to look at the calendar events that are available here in the city of Brockton. And we're going to do so where I share my screen, and that way we all have a we can all have a common understanding of what's being discussed. Okay, what we're looking at here is this is called the Brockton Events Calendar, and we're looking at it for the month of November 2021. You can see for this week coming up, tomorrow is Monday, November 22nd, and there are 3 city council meetings identified here on the calendar. First, we can see listed as a special meeting that's going to start from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And it states here that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 40, Section 56 of the Massachusetts General Laws, a special meeting of the Brockton City Council will be held on Monday to discuss or to determine the percentage of the tax levy that will be shared amongst the different classifications of taxable properties in Brockton. So given that, we're going to go ahead and start by looking at the special meeting that's taking place on Monday, November 22nd from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And when we open up the agenda, you can see it's very simple looking agenda. The main topic here is agenda item number 3 that says order the city council hereby determines the percentages of the local tax levy for fiscal year 22 in accordance with the provisions of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 56, to be borne by each class of real property as defined in Section 2A of Chapter 59. Now, there's a larger document I want to share on screen with everyone. Right. So the first observation is that this document is a total of 39 pages long. And this document is a document that's available for the public to access and to review for the purpose of understanding really what is on the agenda for the public hearing. We can see it's generally 3 topics that we're going to be discussing, 3 topics that the City Council will be voting on Monday. Topic number 1 is regarding a residential factor. And it reads, a policy decision is needed to determine the amount of the tax levy which a residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property classes will bear. A minimum residential factor, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property to as much as 175% of what they would pay at 100% valuation. So now what this means, I'm going to try and explain this. I'm not an expert, but I have made an effort to research the materials made available. And from my assessment, what this means is that currently in the city of Brockton, the residential tax base pays 84.99% of the total tax levy due. In the city of Brockton for fiscal year 22, that's about $160 million is the tax levy value. So almost a little bit less, 1%, 1 basis point less of 85% of that is paid by residential properties. And the rest is paid for by commercial, industrial, and personal. So the proposal in here is that if we were to shift the tax factor by a total max amount of 175%, then the burden for residential property owners would now be 73%. So we're going to move from 84.999% to 73.73%. And the remaining value of the tax levy will be paid by commercial, industrial, and personal. So I'm going to pause right there and let's talk about residential factor. And what are your thoughts? Do you feel that this factor, the residential factor, should stay the same, where the residential properties still pay the same percentage of the burden? Or should it be shifted where they pay less towards the residential, less towards the total tax liability, where they only pay 73%? I'm going to pause and open up the forum for discussion.
Jamal, it's Jean Holmes. So, this goes on every year, and the trouble with it, I mean, of course, the residents should have the shift, which is the most that can be done. My understanding is it's 1.75 is the highest shift that can happen. But what's important to note is that regardless of what shift that they do, the residents are going to pay higher taxes because it goes back to the over-bloated budget. So the tax levy is they have to accumulate enough taxes in order to cover the budget that they put in place in June. So yes, it should be a shift, but at the same time, they always shift it. Every year they shift it. I think last year it might have been 1.73. They can go up to 1.75. I recommended that they go to 1.75, but you're really talking pennies and dimes here for purposes of the residents, between a 1.73 and a 1.75. So yes, there should be a shift for the residents, but even with that shift, the residents are getting nothing in return. They're just going to get a higher tax bill.
Thank you, Jean. Would anybody else like to comment as well?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in, Jamal. If we want to attract business to Brockton, and other than what we already have, maybe something a little better, how does increasing the tax rate affect that? What does that do to the attractiveness? Well, to the attractiveness of Brockton.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I interpret that as by changing the tax rate factor and shifting it where the burden potentially is more on commercial than residential, or compared to where it is now, Does this make Brockton a less attractive place for businesses? It's an open question. I think when the way I look at it is that what are the factors that determine the change in our tax liability? Is that on June 14th, 2021, the City Council approved a budget that totaled $493 million. And this was an 11% increase from the previous year's spending. So that's one variable, is that we have 11% additional scheduled spending. So therefore, our tax levy value needs to increase to meet that new budgetary need that was approved by the City Council on June 14th. So that's one reason why the tax levy will increase. The second reason why your tax liability will increase or change is a function of tax assessments. So assessments on average would have increased. The property cards have been made available as of October 23rd, 2021 this year. And their property owners can see how their assessment values have changed. And so if your assessment values increase, there's a very high likelihood your tax liability will also increase as a function of that assessment increase. And then there's what's being decided on Monday, November 22nd, which is a change in the tax factor. And so in this case, the proposal it sounds like it's to reduce the overall burden, or potentially paying that tax levy value from residential to commercial. But the question is, what kind of society do we want to live in Brockton? Do we want to live in a society where the residential property owners are paying almost 85% of that total tax levy? Or do we want to live in a society where what we're paying 73% or somewhere in between there? And I think that's what the topic is for Monday, November 22nd. And then also touching upon what Gene Holmes raised about this happens every year. And there is a concern about where's our money really going. And in our budget for fiscal year 22, that's where the city government has made best efforts to try and communicate what the planned expenditures are. Everyone might know of where my criticism, where I feel that there's more detail needed to understand that. And I think that's where City Council really plays a role to bridge that.
Jamal, if I can just go back in regards to the businesses and whatnot. So first of all, the businesses get a lot of tax breaks here in the city. So although their rate although the rate would be higher if there's a shift to reduce the residents, at the same time, those businesses are able to get all kinds of tax credits and all kinds of things like that. So I know that that one of the themes that I've heard at these meetings is, oh, well, the poor businesses, businesses. But that's a situation regardless of where you go. So almost every city and town does this. Why it isn't something that maybe the legislature looks at and says, why do we do this? I don't really know. Do you know what I mean? But most in most communities, your businesses are paying higher in taxes than your residents are. And it's a matter of a 1.3 versus a 7.3 rather, versus a 1 or whatever. But you're talking pennies in regards to what your ultimate tax liability is going to be. And the same way with the businesses. My understanding from past years is that although the businesses were paying a higher tax rate, their taxes actually went down. Their actual tax bill that they had to pay went down, even though they were paying that higher rate. Again, because of, they're not paying the, assessed values aren't increasing on them like it is on a resident and whatnot. So there's a bit of a shell game that goes on here, and it's hard to unravel because shell games are precisely intended to do that, to make it difficult to unravel. But I know from my memory of last year, although the shift was done and therefore the businesses were paying higher tax rate, their taxes actually went down. So I don't think that that tax shift is something that really impacts the businesses coming to Brockton or not. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, as was said earlier, that's pretty much what usually happens here, is just figuring out where the tax levy lands and what percentage of residents, industrial, commercial, personal property pay for the city. But if we read the tax rate classification hearing document on the second page, that's what is another layer of things happening that's never been happened here before. It's deciding on a residential factor within the tax levy, which then creates a residential exemption and a small commercial exemption. And if you read that on page 2 of it, where it says residential exemption, in bold lettering, it says Brockton has not adopted this previously. This option is typically adopted to resort communities with seasonal rentals or large cities, many non-owner occupied properties, example apartments. Previously, it has been chosen by 14 out of 351 communities, such as Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, Nantucket, Tisbury, etc. So beyond what we've just discussed about the ordinary every year process of deciding the tax levy, there's something different happening this year about a new formula for creating taxes. And so this is the real big discussion here.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. So what Pat's making reference to is, so we haven't gotten to that section yet, but this is probably a good transition opportunity, is that, so we were talking about the residential factor and the shift of the liability from residential more to commercial, but then it speaks to the second topic speaks to residential exemption, and then the third topic is a small commercial exemption. And just in simplicity, the residential exemption is an option where we could take a segment of residential properties that meet a certain threshold criterion, and they would be eligible for a 35% tax liability reduction. And the value that they would have paid will be paid instead by the remaining residential property owners that do not qualify into this program. And so it looks like 14 out of 351 communities in the state of Massachusetts currently have such a program. And the question is, would Brockton be interested in one as well? And what would that look like?
Well, I guess the question I have is, who is it that this is targeting to benefit?
So my understanding is that there's a potential that, so properties that have a tax assessment value, and by the way, Michelle, I see your hand up and I promise we'll get to you next. The properties that have a tax assessment value of approximately $350,000 or less could be potentially eligible for this 35% reduction in tax liability. But I want to add a little additional caveat to that. I was going to suggest, because I'd like to see this in a conversation, I want to make sure if we have any residential tax exemptions, it's really targeting people who are the most vulnerable and needy in our society. And that's why I was going to advocate that we focus on the disabled. So if you qualify for SSI, so the Social Security Income Disability, due to being disabled, you live in Brockton in your homestead property, then that property should potentially be eligible for a 35% deduction in tax liability. A second category could be the elderly, age 65 or older, living on fixed income. A third category of homestead residents would be if your household income is below the federal poverty line. I feel that all three of these categories of residents should be eligible for a 35% tax exemption as it pertains to this residential exemption topic. I'm going to pause. Michelle, I see you have your hand up.
So one of my issues, and I've heard from residents, part of it is there's no engagement. People are afraid to ask. You know, it's been suggested, implied that if you inquire, you know, about your tax rate, you better be careful because it could go up. You know, how do we help?
Yeah.
How do we help people get past that sort of fear?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is the clarification of really, is no one residential person is going to have a tax rate specific to them. It's equally applied across the board. One, but two, what people do have individually, are their tax assessments on the properties. If you're a renter, you might feel that this conversation doesn't apply to you, but I want to highlight it does apply to you because the cost of the property you're renting is a cost borne by the landlord. And as the cost of owning it increases, the cost of renting it will increase. And so therefore, this does apply to you for especially people who plan on living in Brockton in the long run. So, but one thing I think also that's important to kind of just address that topic regarding individuals who feel like they're unfairly receiving a tax assessment. I want to share with you what the overall assessment changes were for the past couple of years. So that way, if you feel your assessment value went up more than these average increases, maybe you want to reach out to the city to get clarity. Okay, so in 2020, from the so property cards have just been made available as of October 23rd, 2021. You can see your tax assessments, and it looks like the average increase was 8.9% on average. So if you feel your tax assessment was more than, I'd say, I'm going to put a threshold of at least 10% over the average increase, and you didn't, and you have not invested any capital improvement in your property, then you should probably reach out to the tax assessor to gain clarity to understand why your assessment value went over more than 10% of the average increase. I'll pause. Or, hopefully that addressed it. Michelle, does that address what you were speaking to?
Well, it addresses the technical way to do it, but more so my concern is we need this group because people are afraid. There's like discussions, there's rumor, there's all this thing that we have to deal with when it comes to people. And some people have been made afraid. Don't ask. Don't ask for your assessment. Don't ask for a reassessment because they'll come and they'll find something and it will cost you more. And I've heard this from more than one person. So when we need to work on dispelling, either dispelling that as something that's incorrect information, or if it is things that have happened, then deal with it from there.
Yeah. So, yeah, and my only response to that is, people, please, you must live, this is America. We believe in freedom and liberty, and you should be brave and look at your assessment. It's public information. If you have questions on how to do it, you can always reach out to me directly. My name is Jamal Brathwaite, and as the president of the Northeast Brockton Neighborhood Association, we're looking to increase the quality of life in Brockton by promoting increased civic engagement. So as an extension of that, if you have questions on how to look at this information and you need someone who, I don't work for government at all, I'm a private citizen, so you're welcome to reach out to me and we can deep dive on your specific situation to gain greater clarity. I want to acknowledge Patrick Quinn. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, just to add to Michelle's sentiment about people being afraid to ask about their assessment and all that. We have to remember the process, really, the assessment is really algorithms. It's computers and numbers. And so I've had issues in the past where I felt my assessment was over-assessed. And we have to remember, we should really let people know we should approach it as if the system is doing it, not individuals. And once we get past that and give evidence of why things might be the wrong way, if the decision doesn't come down properly, then we can maybe say it's an individual over it. But I know that a lot of people who might have had their assessments lowered are probably those people who did go and did approach the assessors or did an abatement process. And so maybe there's a process here where we can help educate people on how to do the abatement process that happens in February.
Would anybody else like to comment?
I like that idea.
Okay, I want to acknowledge, Liz Lasso, you have your hand up.
Yes, actually, I just looked up, and the last date that you can file for an abatement is February 1st of 2022. So if there is anybody out there that does have a question or wants to, delve into it deeper, you have by February 1st, 2022 to get that done.
Thank you, Liz. That's good knowledge to know. All right, so given all this, before we move on to the third category of the public hearing, which pertains to the potential commercial tax exemption, I want to really kind of come full circle with this topic as it applies to, let me share my screen again so everyone can see. We were on topic 2 now, regarding the residential exemption, and How does everyone feel about that 35% residential exemption on properties that are, are assessed at $350,000 and then those 3 additional subgroups of people? I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you feel that it should be limited to all residential property owners that are $350,000 or less in assessment value, or should it be specific to these the residential property owners that would include disabled, the elderly, and people who live below the poverty line?
I think you need to include all of those.
Right. Okay.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, I think definitely just, I think there's laws already in there that, Americans with disabilities and disabled people and whatever those factors are, elderly people, absolutely. But I tend to not go along the line of putting a dollar amount on it, because I feel like that could also stop people from investing in their properties. They're afraid that their properties might be valued more and they're not going to get the abatement. And so I don't know if I like the $350,000 threshold. I think it should be based on whether or not you're residing here. If you pay taxes here and you have your federal taxes paid here and you live in Brockton, maybe you should get this 35% paid off. This not paid off, but this 35%
reduction.
Or
Yeah,
up to, actually, up to, right?
Yes, up to a 35% residential exemption. Yes. So, okay, so this is fascinating, Patrick. All right, fascinating. So what you're saying is that really the focus should be on these 3 target categories of people that we spoke about, and there really shouldn't be a tax assessment threshold, but really anyway. So even if you own potentially, like say, $1 million home in Brockton, but if you live on fixed income and you're elderly over the age of 65, you should be eligible for some type of exemption, or at least applying for it.
Right.
I think that's a great idea. And the other idea is that, what about giving exemptions for people who actually invest? Instead of saying, we'll give you an exemption if your house isn't valued more than $350,000. Wait, we'll give an exemption if you do put $100,000 addition onto your house for 10 years. We'll give you an exemption for 10 years if you put that $200,000 garage and add on whatever it is. I've seen that in other communities.
That's a great idea.
Where you give exemptions to taxes like a TIF for the investment. Because right now, what Brockton's been doing, this goes into another subject line that is part of what I want to talk about eventually. But we've been giving TIFs out to businesses for years. Let's start giving businesses out to homeowners who want to invest in their properties, that maybe want to add the value to the residential tax base of our community. I've seen it done elsewhere, so it works in helping to attract people who want to invest in their properties.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's a great idea, especially like Michelle had just mentioned. It scares people from wanting to do any kind of improvements, because they fear that, anything that they do, they're just going to have to pay even extra more for. So that's a fantastic idea.
It's not even doing improvements, Liz. It's just people being afraid
to reach out to have their properties assessed.
People should not be afraid to be civically engaged at any level. And that's my issue. We need to make sure that we understand that this is part of the problem.
Absolutely. But also I agree that, having that kind of tax break for people, it could maybe be an incentive to help people improve their property, which then overall improves the quality of the city that we all live in. So I really like that idea, Patrick.
What's been happening, there's already a process of that, is a lot of times you get TIFs for a developer who comes in and develops a building, and within that building, there's all these TIFs for the homeowners for 10, 20 years. And that works, but we don't have that kind of thing happening yet. I still think we have a lot of single residential and multifamily 3-deckers that could really get, if the proper investment was put towards them and brought up to the 21st century architectural standards and stuff, we would have a little different city. And if we were to put something into place to attract that investment, maybe we'd start attracting people who want to do that.
Exactly.
I mean, you just look around all the 3-deckers that used to have front porches on them that no longer are here. Yeah, they all fell apart in the 80s and no one replaced them. So we've got to do some type of incentive for people who own property like that to renovate them into the 21st century.
Disabled seniors who have had their properties single family houses for a long time. A lot of us never made the changes now to bring things up to code. Front to back split, you need to swap the refrigerator and the oven before you do any renovations. Well, all of that's expensive. And when you live on a fixed income, you can't afford to make any changes because you're forced to make big changes in some areas.
Right.
So, I mean, that needs to be considered. There's a lot of us. There's a lot of us.
That was a nice, healthy conversation. So these are definitely points that will that can be re-brought up tomorrow during the public hearing, where residents are welcome to attend and speak up so the council can take their input into consideration. And I promise to be there. So if anyone else comes, you won't be alone. I want to give special recognition that Troy Clarkson was readily available when I reached out to him, and so was John O'Donnell. And when I did attend when I got to their offices, they had all the paperwork laid out on Troy's desk, and I could see everything, and I could ask as many questions as I want, and they were very helpful in clarifying it. So I had the disposal of their time, and I appreciate that accessibility. But at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and segue to the last portion of our conversation today, because we're soon running out of time, and that pertains to the small commercial exemption. I'm going to share my screen once more so that people can see the verbiage that they have recorded here. The language reads, small commercial exemption. A policy decision is needed regarding the small commercial exemption. A small commercial business exemption is an option that can reduce the commercial valuation by up to 10%. However, adopting a small commercial exemption increases the commercial and industrial tax rate. Brockton has not adopted this previously, and this has been previously adopted by 10 out of 351 communities. Does anyone have an opinion about a small commercial exemption or questions? I can speak more about this.
Well, it sounds to me like it would be a positive in helping existing small businesses, as well as attracting new ones. Of course, it shifts that burden over to the commercial and industrial tax rates, but I don't know that that's going to really be felt by them anyway. So without having any other input, it sounds to me like it's a reasonable exemption to vote for it.
Does anyone have any additional conditions you think that should be or parameters that a small commercial property owner should meet in order to qualify for the 10% reduction in the commercial valuation of their property?
Jamal, I think one thing would be that they're not receiving some other deductions. So in other words, those that would get it would be individuals that really need it, that have not been able to get some other type of reductions, you know, through various other avenues, I guess is what I'm saying.
Or perhaps if they, you know, are suffering a business loss instead of having any profitability, like if they can show that they're struggling just to get by month to month.
And I guess for me, as a person just kind of learning and newly learning, I think it'd be helpful to have definitions. I don't know what defines what in this sense a small business is. Is it the yearly revenue that they produce? Is it the number of employees? I don't understand what a small business is, rather.
Yes, I want to acknowledge Patrick Quinn. You might be able to speak to this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question that I think Trinette asked. To me, I'm looking at small businesses, their capital inflows and exflows, and ultimately that's that has to be asked of the city councilors. Because let's say someone who owns a local McDonald's, is that a small business, or is that really not a small business since it's attached to a bigger, larger corporation? I mean, right away, I'm thinking the mom and pop, personally owned corporations, companies already in Brockton, but I'm not thinking the person who might own a family-owned gas station that's attached to Shell or Exxon or something, But I think that has to be asked and thoroughly worked out. That's a great question.
And maybe what the action point around that could be is that during the public hearing, I don't know the answer to that question either in terms of what the parameters are, but it could be asked by a resident who can state that in the scenario that we do have a small commercial exemption, that it is defined the parameters of what type of property owner would be qualified. And in this case, I'll definitely speak up to advise that it shouldn't include anyone who currently benefits from an existing tax exemption program. I guess one thing I also want to add also is just kind of put it all together. I'm going to share my screen. I perceive this to probably be the second most important public hearing of the year after the budget approval meeting on June 14th. And the reason why that is let's see, let me share my screen. Okay, great. So I just want to highlight here that what we're looking at here, the budget, it says $439 million. Actually, the budget for fiscal year 22 was it's even larger. It's $493 million. But what we're looking at here is the overall budget is $493 million. What we're looking at here is the contribution to what's called the general fund, which is $439 million. This is the main operating budget of City Hall. The difference between 493 and 439 million is 54 million, and that pertains to the enterprise funds, which have these are rolling accounts that generate their own revenue. That would be the parks and recreation, sewer, water, renewable energy, and refuse. So anyways, and what I'm highlighting here is so you can see of the 439 million, this tax levy, this 160 million. This is what is being paid through this conversation we've had today regarding the taxation of a property, residential property, commercial property, and what's called personal property. So, and does anyone have any questions? I just want to highlight that so you guys can kind of see how this all fits into the big picture. Does anyone have any questions or statements they'd like to make around this $160 million? Okay, great. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much. You know, I look forward to everybody joining the meeting who can attend on Monday at 6 p.m. And if anyone else would like to say anything, please, this is the opportunity before we close out the call. Okay, so I want to say thank you, everyone, and I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope that as many people as possible can attend the parade celebration taking place on Saturday, November 27th in the city of Brockton. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you for listening to the Brockton Resident Forum, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
Safe, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night. Bye.